The laughter stopped when the bullet found its mark for the 75th consecutive time, and suddenly, everyone realized they had been watching greatness disguised as incompetence. The Golden State Shooting Range in Sacramento stretched across 15 acres of California's Central Valley, its concrete buildings weathered by decades of sun and the percussion of countless rounds fired in pursuit of precision. Every Saturday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, the elite marksmen of Northern California gathered in what they called the Cathedral of Accuracy, a reverent space where reputations were built and legends were born. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning air carried the familiar scent of gun oil and cordite, mixing with the distant aroma of coffee brewing in the clubhouse, where trophies lined every available wall surface. These weren't ordinary weekend shooters or casual enthusiasts. These were men who had dedicated their lives to the art of marksmanship, professionals whose names appeared in shooting magazines, and whose techniques were studied by military snipers and Olympic competitors alike. Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his custom shooting glasses and checked his precision timepiece, a ritual he had performed every Saturday for the past 12 years. As the range's head instructor and former Marine Corps sniper with 3 combat deployments, Marcus commanded respect through a combination of undeniable skill and an intimidating presence that made grown men nervous about their trigger discipline. His personal best of 67 consecutive bullseyes at 300 yards had stood as the range record for 8 years, an achievement that had earned him sponsorship deals and invitations to compete at the national level. Beside him, Thomas Chen methodically arranged his ammunition with the obsessive precision of someone who understood that greatness lived in the details. Thomas had earned his reputation through consistency rather than flash, methodically building a career as a competitive shooter that had netted him 14 state championships and a bronze medal at the Pan American Games. His technique was textbook perfect, taught at shooting academies across the country as the gold standard for competitive marksmanship. The third member of their informal trinity was David Williams, whose background in law enforcement had given him a practical edge that complemented his natural talent. 22 years as a SWAT sniper had taught him that marksmanship wasn't just about hitting targets, but about understanding wind patterns, calculating for atmospheric pressure, and maintaining deadly accuracy under conditions that would break lesser shooters. His weathered hands bore the calluses of someone who had fired more rounds than most people could count, each one a lesson in the brutal mathematics of precision shooting. These 3 men formed the unofficial hierarchy of the Golden State Range, their presence alone enough to make casual shooters reconsider their weekend plans. They had seen wannabes come and go, witnessed the rise and fall of shooters who possessed talent but lacked the mental fortitude required for true mastery. In their world, reputation meant everything, and reputation was earned through years of consistent performance under the watchful eyes of peers who offered no quarter to pretenders. The morning ritual proceeded with familiar precision. Equipment was inspected with the thoroughness of a military operation. Rifles were cleaned and calibrated. Scopes were adjusted to account for the morning's atmospheric conditions. Ammunition was selected with the care of a surgeon choosing instruments. Every movement carried the weight of experience and the expectation of excellence. At exactly 9:15, as the 3 men settled into their shooting positions at the range's most prestigious firing line, a figure approached from the parking area that immediately disrupted their concentration. She walked with an odd combination of confidence and hesitation, carrying what appeared to be a rifle case that had seen better decades. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore faded jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like it had been purchased at a thrift store rather than a premium sporting goods retailer. Marcus noticed her first, his trained eye automatically cataloging details that suggested she didn't belong among serious shooters. Her boots were worn, but not the expensive tactical footwear favored by professionals. Her rifle case was generic vinyl, rather than the custom aluminum cases that protected competition-grade equipment. Most telling of all, she carried herself without the swagger that typically accompanied genuine skill in their world. Thomas followed Marcus's gaze, his expression shifting to mild curiosity mixed with the kind of polite condescension reserved for beginners who had wandered into spaces beyond their skill level. The woman approached the range office with purposeful steps, apparently intent on purchasing range time despite her obvious inexperience. David continued his preparation routine but kept one eye on the developing situation. In his law enforcement career, he had learned to read people quickly and accurately, and everything about this woman suggested she was about to waste everyone's time with amateur-hour shooting that would disrupt the serious work happening at the professional end of the range. The woman emerged from the range office 15 minutes later with a day pass and a target assignment that placed her 3 lanes down from the elite shooting positions. Marcus exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication that conveyed their shared assessment of the situation. They had seen this scenario countless times before. Someone would watch too many action movies or hear too many stories about natural talent, then show up at a professional range expecting to discover they possessed some innate ability that would immediately elevate them to expert status. As she unpacked her equipment, the 3 men couldn't help but observe her technique with the critical eye of professionals evaluating an amateur performance. Her rifle case opened to reveal a weapon that Marcus immediately recognized as a Remington 700, a solid but unremarkable choice that suggested either limited knowledge or a limited budget. The scope mounted on top was functional, but far from the precision optics that serious competitors considered essential equipment. What struck them as most telling, however, was her approach to preparation. Where they had spent 30 minutes methodically setting up their equipment and calculating environmental factors, she simply loaded her rifle, adjusted her scope with what appeared to be casual estimations rather than precise measurements, and assumed a shooting position that looked fundamentally wrong to anyone trained in proper marksmanship technique. Her stance was too relaxed, lacking the rigid stability that accuracy demanded. Her grip appeared loose rather than controlled. Her breathing pattern seemed random, rather than the carefully regulated rhythm that separated professionals from amateurs. Even her target selection suggested inexperience, as she had chosen the standard 100-yard bullseye targets rather than the challenging long-range precision targets that serious shooters use to test their skills. Marcus found himself fighting the urge to offer unsolicited advice. In his role as head instructor, he had developed a reputation for helping serious students improve their technique, but something about this woman's demeanor suggested she wasn't interested in instruction. She appeared content to proceed with what would undoubtedly be an embarrassing display of amateur shooting that would confirm every assumption they had made about her skill level. Thomas was less diplomatic in his assessment. He had spent too many years perfecting his craft to watch patiently, while someone made fundamental errors that could be corrected with basic instruction. The sight of her preparing to fire with such obviously flawed technique activated his professional instincts to intervene before she wasted ammunition and range time on shots that had no chance of accuracy. David's law enforcement background made him more observant of subtle details that his companions might have missed. While he agreed with their general assessment of her amateur status, something about her hands suggested she had handled firearms before. The way she loaded ammunition and operated the rifle's action showed familiarity with the mechanics of shooting, even if her technique appeared fundamentally flawed by competition standards. As the 3 men settled into their own shooting routines, they couldn't entirely ignore the woman 3 lanes away, who was about to demonstrate why marksmanship required years of dedicated training rather than casual weekend practice. Marcus chambered his first round and focused on his breathing pattern, but part of his attention remained fixed on the amateur, who was about to provide an unintentional lesson in the importance of proper technique. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the shooting positions and creating the kind of challenging lighting conditions that separated experienced shooters from beginners. Marcus, Thomas, and David had learned to compensate for these variables through years of practice and competition, adjusting their techniques to maintain accuracy regardless of environmental conditions. The woman, however, seemed oblivious to these factors as she lined up her first shot with what appeared to be nothing more than casual estimation. Her body position remained relaxed in a way that suggested she either didn't understand the importance of stability or didn't care about the accuracy that proper technique would provide. Marcus fired his first shot, a perfect bullseye that drew a nod of satisfaction from his companions. The sound echoed across the range with the authority of precision equipment operated by expert hands. Thomas followed with his own shot, equally precise and equally impressive to anyone who understood the difficulty of consistent accuracy at competitive distances. David's shot completed their opening salvo, 3 perfect strikes, that demonstrated why they commanded respect among the shooting community. Their technique was flawless, their equipment was perfectly calibrated, and their experience showed in every aspect of their performance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 lanes away, the woman prepared to fire her first shot with what appeared to be complete disregard for everything they had just demonstrated about proper marksmanship. Her stance remained casual, her breathing pattern showed no evidence of control, and her grip on the rifle looked more like someone holding a garden hose than someone operating precision equipment. When she fired, the 3 men couldn't help but glance toward her target, expecting to see the kind of wild miss that typically characterized amateur shooting attempts. Beginners usually struggled to hit the target paper at all, let alone achieve any meaningful accuracy. The combination of poor technique, inadequate equipment, and obvious inexperience virtually guaranteed embarrassing results that would confirm every assumption they had made about her skill level. What they saw instead challenged their understanding of how marksmanship actually worked. The shot had found the bullseye with precision that seemed impossible given everything they had observed about her technique. Not just somewhere in the scoring rings, but dead center, in a way that suggested either extraordinary luck or skills that her preparation had completely failed to reveal. Thomas lowered his rifle and stared at her target through his spotting scope, certain that his initial observation had been mistaken. Surely the shot had struck somewhere in the outer rings, and the distance combined with the morning light had created an optical illusion that made the impact appear more accurate than it actually was. But the spotting scope confirmed what his naked eye had suggested. The bullet hole sat precisely in the center of the bullseye, surrounded by unmarked scoring rings that testified to a level of accuracy that even experienced shooters achieved only occasionally. It was the kind of shot that professionals celebrated, accomplished by someone whose technique suggested she should have missed the target entirely. Marcus felt his confidence waver for the first time in years. He had built his reputation on understanding the relationship between technique and results, teaching countless students that proper form was the foundation of accuracy. Everything he had observed about this woman's approach violated the principles he had spent decades perfecting, yet her results spoke with the undeniable authority of a perfectly placed shot. David's law enforcement training kicked in as he tried to reconcile what he had observed with what the target revealed. In his experience, accuracy was never accidental. Precise shooting required precise technique, and precise technique was visible to anyone trained to recognize it. The woman's casual approach should have produced casual results, not the kind of precision that he achieved only through careful attention to every detail of his shooting process. The woman appeared unaware of the attention her shot had attracted. She worked the bolt of her rifle with smooth efficiency, ejecting the spent case and chambering a fresh round with movements that spoke of familiarity despite her overall amateur appearance. Her breathing remained steady, her stance remained relaxed, and her grip on the rifle continued to look fundamentally wrong, according to everything the 3 men had learned about proper marksmanship. Her second shot followed the same pattern as the first. No visible preparation. No apparent attention to the environmental factors that Marcus, Thomas, and David calculated obsessively. No evidence of the mental discipline that competitive shooting demanded. Just a casual alignment, a steady trigger press, and another result that defied logical explanation. The bullet struck the target with the same precision as her first shot, creating a second hole so close to the first that they appeared to overlap. 2 shots that would have been impressive from any shooter, but seemed impossible from someone whose technique suggested she had learned to shoot by watching television rather than through proper instruction. Marcus found himself questioning everything he thought he understood about marksmanship. His 12 years of teaching experience had been built on the foundation that results reflected technique, that accuracy was the inevitable product of proper form and consistent practice. This woman was achieving results that contradicted every principle he had spent his career teaching to students who struggled to achieve half her apparent accuracy despite years of dedicated training. Thomas was experiencing his own crisis of understanding. His bronze medal had been earned through obsessive attention to every detail of shooting technique, countless hours of practice devoted to perfecting form that would produce consistent results under competition pressure. His textbook technique was taught at shooting schools precisely because it represented the most reliable path to accuracy that decades of competitive experience had identified. Yet 3 lanes away, someone was achieving results that matched or exceeded his own performance while apparently ignoring every principle that made his success possible. Her casual approach to what he considered a demanding technical discipline challenged everything he believed about the relationship between effort and achievement. David's practical experience suggested that exceptional marksmanship always had an explanation, even when that explanation wasn't immediately obvious. His years as a SWAT sniper had taught him that accuracy under pressure required mental discipline that was visible to trained observers. The woman's relaxed demeanor should have indicated an amateur who didn't understand the demands of precision shooting, not someone capable of consecutive bullseyes that professional shooters would celebrate. As the morning progressed, the woman continued her shooting routine with the same casual efficiency that had characterized her first 2 shots. Each round found the target with precision that seemed to mock the careful preparation and technical expertise that Marcus, Thomas, and David brought to their own shooting. Her target began to resemble the kind of performance that shooting magazines featured in articles about exceptional marksmanship, accomplished by someone whose technique suggested she should be struggling to hit the target paper. The 3 men found their own shooting deteriorating as their attention became divided between their personal performance and the impossible display happening 3 lanes away. Marcus missed his first shot in 8 months, a wild pull that struck the 7 ring and shattered his concentration. Thomas struggled with his trigger control, second-guessing technique that had been automatic for years. David found himself calculating wind conditions obsessively, overcompensating for factors he normally handled through instinct developed over decades of professional shooting. By the time the woman had fired her 10th consecutive bullseye, word had begun to spread among the other shooters at the range. Conversations stopped as people moved to observe her performance through spotting scopes and binoculars. The range's atmosphere shifted from casual competition to focused attention on what appeared to be either an extraordinary display of skill or the most improbable streak of luck in Golden State Range history. Marcus realized that his reputation as head instructor was being challenged by someone whose technique he couldn't understand and whose results he couldn't explain. Everything he had taught about marksmanship suggested that her performance should be impossible, yet the evidence was accumulating one perfect shot at a time in a display that made his own record seem suddenly vulnerable. Thomas felt his competitive instincts activated by what appeared to be a direct challenge to his status as the range's most accomplished shooter. His bronze medal and state championships had been earned through dedication that this woman seemed to be matching through casual effort that violated every principle of competitive shooting he had spent years mastering. David's law enforcement training urged him to investigate further, to understand how someone could achieve results that seemed to contradict the fundamental relationship between technique and accuracy that he had relied upon throughout his career. His professional paranoia suggested that something was being concealed, that the woman's casual demeanor masked experience or training that would explain her impossible performance. As the woman prepared for her 11th shot, the 3 men found themselves united in their need to understand what they were witnessing. Their individual reputations and their collective understanding of marksmanship were being challenged by someone who appeared to be rewriting the rules of accuracy through methods that made no sense according to everything they thought they knew about precision shooting. The answer to their confusion would prove to be more complex and more remarkable than any of them could have imagined. Hidden behind a casual exterior that concealed years of experience earned in circumstances that would redefine their understanding of what marksmanship could accomplish when necessity, rather than competition, provided the motivation for perfection. The whispers began around her 15th consecutive bullseye, spreading through the range like wildfire through dry grass. Experienced shooters abandoned their own practice sessions to witness what appeared to be either the most remarkable display of natural talent in Golden State Range history, or an elaborate hoax that no one could quite figure out how to expose. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis, as the woman's shooting defied every principle he had built his career upon. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his spotting scope for the dozenth time, desperate to find some flaw in her technique that would explain the impossible accuracy. The scope revealed nothing but truth written in perfectly placed bullet holes that mocked his understanding of how marksmanship actually worked. The woman's target had begun to resemble a single large hole rather than multiple impacts, each shot placed with such precision that the holes overlapped in ways that suggested machine-like consistency rather than human performance. Marcus had seen computer-controlled shooting systems that struggled to achieve such accuracy, yet this amateur was accomplishing it with equipment that belonged in a beginner's class rather than a precision shooting competition. Thomas lowered his rifle completely, his own shooting session forgotten, in the face of what he was witnessing. His bronze medal suddenly felt like a participation trophy compared to the effortless perfection being displayed 3 lanes away. Years of technical training and competitive experience seemed worthless when confronted with results that suggested natural ability could trump dedicated practice. The crowd gathering behind the shooting line grew larger as word spread through the range's clubhouse and practice areas. Veteran shooters who had been cleaning equipment or studying ballistics charts found themselves drawn to witness what older members were already calling the most extraordinary shooting display they had ever seen. David's law enforcement instincts urged him to investigate more thoroughly, but every observation only deepened the mystery. The woman's rifle was standard production equipment, her ammunition appeared to be basic factory loads, and her shooting position remained stubbornly casual despite producing results that would have been remarkable even with precision competition gear. Her breathing pattern showed no evidence of the controlled rhythm that snipers learn to manage their heartbeat and steady their aim. Her grip remained relaxed rather than the firm, consistent hold that competitive shooters practiced for thousands of repetitions. Even her eye position behind the scope appeared casual, lacking the precise alignment that accuracy demanded. Yet shot after shot found the bullseye with mechanical precision that suggested either extraordinary natural ability or training so advanced that it appeared effortless. David had worked with military snipers whose years of specialized training produced similar results, but their technique was visibly different, marked by the rigid discipline that extreme accuracy required. By her 20th consecutive bullseye, the atmosphere at the range had transformed completely. Casual conversations stopped as shooters focused their attention on the woman whose performance was rewriting their understanding of what was possible. Cell phones emerged from pockets as people began recording what they sensed was a historic moment in marksmanship. Marcus found his voice caught in his throat as he attempted to process what he was witnessing. His role as head instructor had been built on helping students understand the relationship between proper technique and accurate results. Everything he had taught suggested that consistency required consistency, that precise shooting demanded precise form repeated until it became automatic. This woman was achieving precision that exceeded his own best performances, while apparently ignoring every fundamental principle he had spent decades perfecting. Her casual approach to what he considered a demanding technical discipline challenged not just his understanding of marksmanship, but his entire identity as someone who had mastered the science of accuracy. Thomas felt his competitive instincts warring with genuine awe as the woman's performance continued without any sign of degradation. His own best streak had been 37 consecutive bullseyes during a state championship, accomplished under ideal conditions with equipment calibrated to perfection and mental preparation that had taken hours of meditation and visualization. The woman appeared to be shooting as casually as someone might throw darts at a bar, yet her results suggested focus and precision that championship competitors achieved only during peak performance under optimal conditions. Her relaxed demeanor seemed to mock the intensity and preparation that he had always believed were necessary for exceptional marksmanship. David's practical experience suggested that extraordinary shooting always had an explanation rooted in training and experience, but he couldn't identify any visible evidence of the specialized instruction that such performance typically required. Military snipers moved differently, competition shooters prepared differently, and law enforcement marksmen approached their weapons differently than this woman, who seemed to be achieving superior results through methods that made no sense. The range fell increasingly quiet as her shot count reached 25, then 30, then 35 consecutive perfect bullseyes. Even the staff members responsible for maintaining the facility found excuses to observe the shooting that was becoming legendary with each trigger pull. Range officers who had seen thousands of shooters over decades of operation whispered among themselves about performances they had witnessed, none of which compared to what was unfolding. Marcus attempted to resume his own shooting but found his concentration completely shattered. His hands shook as he tried to align his sights, muscle memory disrupted by the cognitive dissonance of watching someone achieve results that his training said should be impossible. His carefully calibrated shooting routine felt suddenly inadequate when compared to the effortless accuracy being displayed nearby. The woman seemed completely unaware of the attention her performance had attracted. She continued her shooting with the same casual efficiency that had characterized her first shots, working the bolt of her rifle with smooth movements that spoke of familiarity despite her amateur appearance. Each shot followed the same pattern: minimal preparation, steady trigger press, perfect result. Thomas found himself studying her technique, with the desperate intensity of someone whose worldview was crumbling one bullet hole at a time. His years of competitive experience had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of advanced marksmanship, the tiny details that separated professionals from amateurs and champions from mere competitors. Yet this woman displayed none of the recognized indicators of elite shooting ability. Her stance remained relaxed when it should have been rigid, her breathing appeared random when it should have been controlled, and her equipment preparation was casual when it should have been obsessive. Everything about her approach suggested amateur status, while her results spoke of mastery that exceeded anything he had achieved through years of dedicated training. David's investigative instincts urged him to approach the woman directly, to ask questions that might explain the contradiction between her apparent inexperience and her impossible accuracy. His law enforcement background had taught him that remarkable performances usually had remarkable explanations, stories that revealed the true source of seemingly supernatural abilities. But something about the woman's demeanor discouraged casual conversation. She seemed focused on her shooting in a way that suggested interruption would be unwelcome, despite her relaxed appearance. Her concentration appeared complete, even though it looked nothing like the intense focus that competitive shooting typically required. As her shot count reached 40 consecutive bullseyes, the crowd behind the shooting line had grown to include nearly every person at the range. Scheduled training sessions were forgotten as instructors and students alike gathered to witness what was clearly becoming a historic performance in marksmanship. Marcus felt his reputation as the range's premier marksman evaporating with each perfect shot. His record of 67 consecutive bullseyes, achieved under competition conditions with preparation that had taken months, was being approached by someone whose preparation had consisted of loading a rifle and assuming a shooting position that looked fundamentally wrong. The mathematical improbability of what he was witnessing challenged his understanding of how skill and luck interacted in precision shooting. 40 consecutive bullseyes represented accuracy that professional shooters achieved only during peak performance. Yet this woman was accomplishing it with equipment and technique that suggested she should be struggling to hit the target paper. Thomas found himself questioning everything he had believed about the relationship between training and performance. His bronze medal had been earned through technical perfection that had required years to develop, countless hours of practice devoted to eliminating every variable that could affect accuracy. His success had validated the principle that consistent results required consistent technique. This woman was achieving results that exceeded his medal-winning performance, while apparently ignoring every principle that had made his success possible. Her casual approach to precision shooting challenged not just his understanding of marksmanship, but his faith in the value of dedicated training and technical expertise. David's practical experience with exceptional shooters had taught him to recognize the signs of advanced training even when that training came from unconventional sources. Military snipers, competitive champions, and law enforcement marksmen all carried themselves differently, prepared differently, and approached their weapons with visible respect for the demands of precision shooting. The woman displayed none of these characteristics, yet her performance suggested training that exceeded anything he had encountered in decades of professional shooting. Her results spoke of experience that her appearance completely failed to reveal, creating a mystery that his investigative instincts demanded he solve. By her 45th consecutive bullseye, even the most skeptical observers had stopped looking for explanations rooted in luck or coincidence. The mathematical probability of such sustained accuracy through chance alone was so remote that it entered the realm of impossibility rather than mere improbability. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. His identity as the range's authority on marksmanship was being challenged by someone whose success made his expertise appear worthless. Years of teaching students proper technique seemed pointless when confronted with results that suggested proper technique might be irrelevant. The woman's shooting continued with the same mechanical precision that had characterized her entire performance. Her rifle cycled with smooth efficiency, spent cases ejecting cleanly while fresh rounds chambered with movements that spoke of thousands of repetitions despite her amateur appearance. Thomas realized that his competitive career might never recover from witnessing this performance. How could he return to competitions where judges evaluated technique and form when he had seen someone achieve superior results through methods that violated every principle of competitive shooting? His years of technical training felt suddenly obsolete in the face of natural ability that transcended conventional understanding. David's law enforcement training urged him to document what he was witnessing, to preserve evidence of performance that might never be repeated or believed without proof. His phone joined the dozens already recording the shooting that was becoming legendary with each perfect shot. As the woman prepared for her 50th shot, the range had fallen completely silent except for the mechanical sounds of her rifle cycling and the distant traffic from the highway beyond the facility's boundaries. 50 consecutive bullseyes represented accuracy that would be remarkable for a computer-controlled shooting system, nearly impossible for human performance under any conditions. Marcus found himself holding his breath as she aligned her rifle for the shot that would equal his best single-session performance. His record, achieved through optimal conditions and preparation that had taken hours, was being matched by someone whose preparation had consisted of casual equipment setup and shooting positions that looked fundamentally incorrect. The shot rang out across the silent range with the authority of precision equipment operated by expert hands. The bullet found the bullseye with the same mechanical accuracy that had characterized her entire performance, creating the 50th perfect hole in a target that was beginning to resemble abstract art rather than evidence of human marksmanship. Thomas felt his understanding of competitive shooting collapse completely as he realized that everything he had believed about the relationship between technique and results might be fundamentally wrong. His bronze medal and state championships seemed worthless when confronted with natural ability that made years of training appear pointless. David's investigative instinct screamed that exceptional performance always had exceptional explanations, that natural talent alone could not account for accuracy that exceeded the capabilities of trained professionals using superior equipment under optimal conditions. The woman's shooting suggested experience and training that her appearance completely failed to reveal. As she prepared for her 51st shot, the woman finally seemed to notice the attention her performance had attracted. Her eyes swept across the crowd of observers with casual interest, showing no surprise at the audience that had gathered to witness her shooting. Her expression remained neutral, suggesting that exceptional marksmanship was simply routine rather than the extraordinary performance that everyone else recognized. Marcus felt his voice catch in his throat as he prepared to witness shooting that would exceed his personal best performance. Everything he had built his reputation upon was being surpassed by someone whose technique suggested she should be taking beginner lessons rather than rewriting the standards of precision marksmanship. The mathematical impossibility of what he was witnessing challenged not just his understanding of shooting, but his faith in the principles that had guided his entire career. If proper technique and dedicated training could be surpassed by casual effort and natural ability, then everything he had taught his students might be fundamentally wrong. Thomas realized that his competitive career had been built on assumptions that were crumbling with each perfect shot. His technical perfection, achieved through years of obsessive practice, was being made irrelevant by someone whose approach to marksmanship violated every principle he had spent his life mastering. David's practical experience suggested that the truth behind exceptional performance was always more complex than it initially appeared. The woman's shooting indicated training and experience that her casual demeanor was designed to conceal, but he couldn't identify any visible evidence of the specialized instruction that such accuracy typically required. As the woman's shot count approached levels that would challenge the greatest marksmen in history, the three men found themselves confronting the possibility that everything they understood about precision shooting might be incomplete or entirely wrong. The casual destruction of their assumptions was continuing one perfect shot at a time, building toward revelations that would transform their understanding of what marksmanship could accomplish, when necessity rather than competition provided the motivation for perfection. The silence shattered like glass when Marcus finally found his voice, desperation overriding his usual professional composure. "Ma'am, excuse me, but I have to ask where you learned to shoot like that." His words carried across the range with the weight of someone whose entire worldview was dissolving one bullet hole at a time. The woman paused in her reloading process, her hands stilling on the rifle bolt as she turned to acknowledge the speaker for the first time since beginning her impossible demonstration. Her eyes, sharp and calculating despite her casual appearance, swept across the gathered crowd with an expression that suggested mild surprise at the attention her shooting had attracted. "I'm sorry," she replied, her voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed at odds with her disheveled appearance. "I didn't realize I was creating a distraction. I can move to a different section if my practice is interfering with your session." Thomas stepped forward, his competitive instincts warring with genuine curiosity about the woman whose performance was rewriting his understanding of what human marksmanship could accomplish. "No, please don't apologize. We're just wondering about your background. 58 consecutive bullseyes is extraordinary by any standard." The woman's slight smile suggested amusement at their fascination with what she appeared to consider routine performance. "It's really not that impressive. I'm just trying to maintain basic proficiency." Her casual dismissal of accuracy that would be celebrated in shooting magazines only deepened the mystery surrounding her true capabilities and training. David's law enforcement instincts activated as he studied her response for clues about the specialized training that such performance typically indicated. Basic proficiency doesn't usually include accuracy that exceeds most competition standards. Military background? The question hung in the air between them as the woman's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle tightening around her eyes that suggested the topic had touched on something she preferred not to discuss. "Something like that," she replied after a pause that lasted long enough to be noticeable. Marcus felt his instructor instincts override his shattered confidence as he attempted to understand the techniques that were producing such extraordinary results. "Would you mind if we observed your shooting position? Your stance appears different from conventional competitive techniques, but your results speak for themselves." The woman shrugged with apparent indifference to their professional scrutiny. "You're welcome to watch, though I'm not sure what you'll learn. Everyone develops their own approach based on what works for them." She turned back to her rifle, chambering another round with movements that continued to speak of familiarity despite her casual demeanor. As she assumed her shooting position, the three men studied her technique with the intensity of scientists examining a phenomenon that challenged established laws of physics. Her stance remained stubbornly relaxed. Her breathing showed no evidence of the controlled patterns that precision shooting typically required, and her grip on the rifle continued to appear loose rather than the firm, consistent hold that accuracy demanded. Thomas found himself questioning decades of technical training as he watched her prepare for Shot 59. Everything he had learned about competitive marksmanship suggested that her approach should produce inconsistent results at best, yet her target told a different story, written in perfectly placed bullet holes that mocked conventional wisdom. The shot rang out with the same authority that had characterized her entire performance, and the bullet found the bullseye with mechanical precision that continued to defy logical explanation. 59 consecutive perfect shots represented accuracy that professional shooters achieved only during peak performance under optimal conditions. David's investigative training urged him to probe deeper into the contradictions between her apparent inexperience and her impossible results. That rifle and scope combination isn't typically associated with precision shooting. Most competitors use specialized equipment for consistency at this level. The woman's response came without looking away from her target. Equipment is less important than people think. A good shooter can achieve accuracy with basic gear if they understand the fundamentals. Her casual dismissal of the expensive precision equipment that lined the walls of shooting supply stores only added to the mystery of her capabilities. Marcus felt his role as head instructor becoming increasingly irrelevant as he watched someone achieve superior results using methods that contradicted everything he taught his students. "The fundamentals you're demonstrating don't match conventional marksmanship training. Your breathing pattern, your stance, even your trigger control appears different from standard techniques." "Standard techniques work for most people," the woman replied, finally turning to face him directly. "But some situations require adaptations that aren't taught in conventional training programs." The statement carried undertones that suggested experience earned under circumstances far removed from the controlled environment of a shooting range. Thomas felt his competitive confidence crumbling as he realized that his years of technical perfection might be inferior to natural ability that transcended conventional understanding. What kind of situations require such adaptations? His question carried the weight of someone whose entire identity was built on mastering the science of precision shooting. The woman's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that transformed her from casual shooter to something more dangerous and experienced, the kind where missing isn't an option for survival. Her words fell into the silence like stones into deep water, creating ripples of understanding that transformed the observer's perception of what they were witnessing. David's law enforcement background provided context for her statement that sent chills down his spine. Shooting where missing meant death belonged in combat zones and tactical operations, environments where accuracy was measured in lives saved rather than points scored. Military sniper? The question triggered a visible reaction that the woman couldn't entirely suppress, a momentary tensing of shoulders that spoke of memories better left undisturbed. "Former," she said simply, the single word carrying more weight than lengthy explanations could have provided. Marcus felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to align. As he realized that they had been watching military-trained precision that made civilian competitions seem like recreational games. Military snipers operated under conditions and pressures that transformed marksmanship from sport to life-or-death necessity, developing skills that civilian shooters could barely comprehend. "What unit?" Thomas asked, his competitive instincts replaced by genuine respect for someone whose training had been earned under circumstances that made his medal competitions seem insignificant by comparison. The woman's silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable before she finally responded. "That information is classified." Her tone suggested that further questioning along those lines would be unwelcome, but her acknowledgement of military service explained the impossible accuracy they had been witnessing. David's practical experience with military marksmen provided context for the casual excellence they had observed. Special operations snipers trained under conditions that made civilian shooting ranges seem like comfortable playgrounds, developing accuracy that was literally a matter of life and death, rather than trophies and recognition. As the woman prepared for her 60th shot, the crowd's energy shifted from amazement to reverence as they realized they were witnessing skills developed under combat conditions that none of them could fully understand. Military precision explained the mechanical accuracy that had seemed impossible when attributed to civilian training. The shot found its mark with the same perfection that had characterized her entire performance, but now the observers understood that they were watching someone for whom such accuracy had been a survival requirement rather than a recreational achievement. 60 consecutive bullseyes represented not exceptional talent, but maintained proficiency in skills that had once meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Marcus found his voice thick with emotion as he processed the implications of what they had witnessed. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We didn't realize we were watching someone whose training came from circumstances we couldn't understand." The woman's expression softened slightly at his acknowledgement, though her posture remained guarded. "You couldn't have known. I don't exactly look like what people expect from someone with my background." Her self-aware comment about her disheveled appearance only emphasized the disconnect between her current circumstances and her obvious capabilities. Thomas felt his competitive pride transformed into something approaching awe as he realized that his bronze medal represented achievement in games rather than the deadly serious business that had shaped her skills. "How long since you've been out of service?" 3 years, she replied, her voice carrying undertones of experiences that civilian life hadn't been able to erase. "Adjustment has been challenging." The understatement in her response suggested struggles that went far beyond learning to shoot recreationally rather than professionally. David's law enforcement experience provided insight into the difficulties that military personnel faced when transitioning from combat operations to civilian life, particularly those whose specialized skills had limited applications outside of tactical environments. "PTSD?" The woman's nod was almost imperceptible, but it confirmed what her appearance and circumstances had already suggested. 3 years of civilian life hadn't been kind to someone whose military service had left invisible wounds that shooting ranges couldn't heal. Her presence at the range suddenly made sense as therapy, rather than recreation. Marcus felt shame wash over him as he realized that they had been watching someone use marksmanship as a form of meditation, maintaining connection to skills that had defined her identity during military service. Her casual attitude wasn't arrogance, but rather the practiced efficiency of someone for whom precision shooting was as natural as breathing. As the woman prepared for shot 61, the observers understood that they were witnessing more than exceptional marksmanship. They were watching someone maintain proficiency in skills that had once saved lives, using accuracy as a bridge between military service and civilian existence that had proven more challenging than combat operations. The revelation transformed their understanding of everything they had witnessed, recontextualizing casual excellence as maintained readiness for a world that she couldn't entirely leave behind, despite 3 years of trying to adapt to civilian life. The weight of understanding settled over the range like morning fog as the woman continued her shooting with mechanical precision that now carried deeper meaning. Each perfect shot represented more than maintained proficiency. It was a desperate attempt to hold on to the one skill that had defined her worth during years when her life had clear purpose and undeniable value. Marcus felt the full impact of his earlier assumptions crash over him like a physical blow. The disheveled appearance that had triggered his condescension suddenly took on tragic dimensions, as he realized he had been judging someone whose service had cost her everything, except the ability to place bullets exactly where she intended them to go. "What was your longest confirmed kill?" David asked quietly, his law enforcement background providing context for understanding the kind of precision they had been witnessing. The question carried professional respect rather than morbid curiosity, one warrior acknowledging another's expertise in the deadly mathematics of long-range engagement. The woman's hand stilled on her rifle as memories surfaced that civilian life hadn't been able to bury. 1,873 meters, she replied after a pause that stretched long enough to encompass lifetimes of consequences. Afghanistan, 2021. Single shot, moving target. Wind conditions that should have made the shot impossible. Thomas felt his mouth go dry as he processed the implications of what she had just revealed. Nearly 2 kilometers of precision shooting under combat conditions represented accuracy that belonged in the realm of legend rather than reality. His competition medals suddenly seemed like children's toys compared to marksmanship that had been tested in life-or-death circumstances. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible as he struggled to comprehend shooting that transcended anything he had imagined possible. 2,000 meters exceeded the range capabilities of most civilian shooting facilities, requiring calculations and adjustments that pushed the boundaries of what physics and human skill could accomplish together. The woman's expression remained neutral, but her grip on the rifle tightened almost imperceptibly as she continued. The target was a Taliban commander who had been coordinating attacks on civilian convoys. Intelligence indicated he would be moving between positions at a specific time. One opportunity, one shot, hundreds of lives depending on the outcome. David's practical experience with tactical operations provided context for the pressure she had faced during that engagement. Missing would have meant the target escaped to continue orchestrating attacks that would kill innocent people, while success would eliminate a threat, but add another death to the psychological burden that every sniper carried. "Did you have a spotter?" Thomas asked, understanding enough about long-range shooting to know that such distances typically required a 2-person team for accurate range estimation and environmental calculations. "My spotter took shrapnel from a mortar around 30 minutes before the shot window opened," she replied, her voice carrying the flat tone of someone reciting facts to avoid feeling them. "I had to calculate range, wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and target movement alone while under indirect fire that was walking closer every few minutes." Marcus felt his understanding of marksmanship pressure completely redefined, as he imagined shooting under conditions where incoming artillery provided a deadline measured in minutes, rather than the comfortable time frames of civilian competition. Her casual dismissal of what he considered exceptional accuracy suddenly made sense when viewed against standards where failure meant death. The woman prepared for her 65th shot with the same mechanical efficiency that had characterized her entire performance, but now the observers understood that they were watching someone maintain connection to moments when her skills had mattered more than life itself. Each perfect bullseye represented an echo of precision that had once saved lives in circumstances that civilian shooters couldn't comprehend. "What happened after you left the service?" David asked, his question carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many veterans struggle with transitions that civilian society didn't understand or support adequately. The woman's bitter laugh contained enough pain to fill cemeteries as she considered how to explain 3 years of discovering that skills which had made her invaluable in combat were largely useless in civilian life. Turns out that being able to kill someone from 2 kilometers away isn't particularly marketable in the civilian job market. Her words fell into silence that stretched uncomfortably as everyone present processed the tragic irony of someone whose specialized training had saved countless lives but left her unemployable in peacetime society. The gap between military service and civilian reintegration had claimed another casualty, one whose survival skills couldn't bridge the disconnect between wartime necessity and peacetime irrelevance. Thomas felt shame wash over him as he realized that his competitive success had been built on recreational shooting, while she had developed her skills under conditions where accuracy determined whether families lived or died. His technical training seemed insignificant compared to expertise earned through experiences that had left psychological scars invisible to casual observation. "The nightmares started about 6 months after discharge," she continued, her voice taking on the flat quality of someone reciting medical history to avoid emotional connection to the words. "Turns out that killing people, even when it's necessary and justified, leaves marks that don't show up on physical examinations." Marcus realized that her presence at the range represented more than practice or recreation. Shooting was therapy, a way to maintain connection to skills that had once provided clear purpose and undeniable value during years when her life had meaning that civilian existence couldn't replace. David's experience with veterans suggested that many struggled with the transition from military service, where their specialized skills made them vital to civilian life, where those same skills were often viewed with suspicion or fear. Society thanked them for their service, but provided little support for integrating warriors back into communities that couldn't understand what they had experienced. "I've been homeless for 18 months, the woman added, her casual delivery of devastating personal information emphasizing how thoroughly her life had deteriorated since leaving military service. Turns out that having PTSD makes it difficult to maintain employment, and having employment gaps makes it difficult to find housing." The crowd's energy shifted as they realized that the extraordinary marksmanship they had been witnessing belonged to someone whose service had cost her everything except the ability to place bullets exactly where she intended them to go. Her disheveled appearance wasn't the result of carelessness, but rather the inevitable consequence of a society that celebrated military service in theory while abandoning veterans in practice. Thomas felt his competitive pride transform into something approaching horror, as he understood that his bronze medal represented games, while her accuracy had been developed through experiences that had left her broken and forgotten by the country she had served. His success in recreational shooting seemed meaningless compared to skills earned through sacrifice that civilian society couldn't comprehend or adequately support. "The shooting helps," she continued, her voice carrying undertones of desperate need for connection to something that made sense in a world that had become incomprehensible. "For a few hours I can remember being someone whose skills mattered, whose precision saved lives instead of being viewed as a liability by potential employers." Marcus understood that her 70 consecutive bullseyes represented more than maintained proficiency. Each perfect shot was a desperate attempt to hold on to identity and purpose that military service had provided, but civilian life had been unable to replace with anything meaningful or valuable. As the woman prepared for shot 71, the observers realized they were witnessing someone use marksmanship as a bridge between military service that had given her life clear meaning and civilian existence that had proven more challenging than combat operations. Her accuracy was a lifeline to skills that had once made her indispensable. David's law enforcement background provided insight into the difficulties that specialized military personnel faced when their training had limited civilian applications. Snipers, in particular, struggled with transitions because their skills were simultaneously celebrated and feared by society that preferred to honor their service abstractly, rather than deal with the practical realities of reintegration. "How do you afford ammunition?" Thomas asked, his question carrying practical concern for someone whose financial circumstances clearly made recreational shooting a luxury she couldn't afford. The woman's smile carried enough bitterness to poison wells as she gestured toward her worn equipment. "I don't eat much, and range time is cheaper than therapy. Besides, this is the only place where I can still be good at something that matters, even if it's just hitting paper targets instead of protecting people." Her words emphasized the tragic disconnect between military service, where her skills had saved lives, and civilian life, where those same skills were viewed as disturbing reminders of violence that polite society preferred to ignore. The range had become her sanctuary, the only place where precision was celebrated rather than feared. Marcus felt the weight of his earlier assumptions crushing him as he realized that he had dismissed someone whose service had cost her everything while providing skills that exceeded anything he had achieved through decades of recreational shooting. His role as head instructor seemed suddenly insignificant compared to expertise earned through experiences that had left invisible wounds. The woman fired her 72nd consecutive bullseye with the same mechanical precision that had characterized her entire performance, but now the observers understood that each perfect shot represented desperate maintenance of connection to skills that had once provided clear purpose and undeniable value. "What unit were you with?" David asked, his professional curiosity balanced by respect for someone whose service had clearly involved classified operations that civilian society wasn't meant to understand or acknowledge. "That information remains classified," she replied, but her tone suggested appreciation for his professional interest rather than annoyance at persistent questioning. "Let's just say that my targets weren't typically wearing uniforms or following conventional rules of engagement." The implications of her statement transformed the observers' understanding of what they had been witnessing. Special operations snipers operated in circumstances where conventional rules didn't apply, eliminating threats that couldn't be addressed through normal military channels. Her skills had been developed through experiences that most people couldn't imagine and shouldn't have to understand. Thomas realized that his competitive career had been built on recreational shooting, while she had developed her accuracy through operations that remained hidden from public knowledge. His technical perfection seemed meaningless compared to marksmanship that had been tested under conditions where failure meant catastrophic consequences for national security. As the woman prepared for shot 73, her movements carried the weight of someone maintaining connection to skills that had once made her invaluable, but now served only as painful reminders of purpose that civilian life couldn't replace. Each perfect bullseye represented an echo of precision that had mattered more than life itself. "The worst part isn't the nightmares or the homelessness," she continued, her voice carrying layers of pain that went beyond physical discomfort or financial hardship. "The worst part is knowing that I was good at something important, that my skills saved lives and protected people. But now those same skills make me unemployable and dangerous in the eyes of civilian society." David understood the bitter irony of veterans whose specialized training made them vital during military service, but problematic during civilian reintegration. Society celebrated their sacrifice abstractly, while struggling to integrate warriors whose skills were simultaneously honored and feared. Marcus felt his identity as a marksmanship instructor crumbling as he realized that everything he taught his students was recreational, compared to accuracy that had been developed through experiences that most people couldn't comprehend. His expertise seemed worthless when compared to skills earned through service that had cost her everything except the ability to place bullets exactly where she intended them to go. The woman fired her 74th consecutive bullseye, and the crowd realized they were witnessing more than exceptional marksmanship. They were watching someone maintain connection to skills that had once provided clear meaning and undeniable value during years when her life had purpose that civilian society couldn't understand or adequately support. 74, Thomas whispered, his voice carrying awe mixed with shame as he processed the implications of accuracy that exceeded anything he had achieved through recreational competition. His bronze medal represented games, while her precision had been developed through operations that remained classified for reasons that civilian society preferred not to understand. As she prepared for what would be her 75th shot, the woman's expression carried resignation mixed with desperate need to maintain connection to skills that had once made her indispensable. The range had become her sanctuary, the only place where precision was celebrated, rather than viewed as evidence of psychological damage that made her unemployable. The final shot rang out across the silent range with authority that carried the weight of 75 consecutive perfect bullseyes, each one representing maintained proficiency in skills that had once saved lives, but now served only as painful reminders of purpose that civilian life couldn't replace. The bullet found the bullseye with mechanical precision that completed a demonstration of accuracy that would be remembered in Golden State Range history, accomplished by someone whose service had cost her everything, except the ability to achieve perfection that civilian society couldn't understand or adequately value. Marcus stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion as he finally understood the true cost of the extraordinary marksmanship they had witnessed. "Ma'am, I don't know your name, but I want you to know that what you've shown us today has changed how I understand what marksmanship really means." The woman's expression softened slightly at his acknowledgement, though her posture remained guarded by 3 years of civilian life that had taught her to expect judgment rather than understanding. "It's Emma," she replied simply. "Emma Chen, and this is just what I do to remember who I used to be." The name humanized someone who had become legendary through 75 consecutive bullseyes that represented more than exceptional accuracy. Emma Chen was a veteran whose service had provided skills that civilian society celebrated abstractly but couldn't integrate practically, leaving her homeless and forgotten despite capabilities that exceeded anything the observers had imagined possible. Thomas felt his competitive career redefined as he realized that his achievements represented games while Emma's accuracy had been developed through experiences that most people couldn't comprehend. His technical perfection seemed meaningless compared to marksmanship that had been tested under conditions where failure meant catastrophic consequences. David's law enforcement background provided context for understanding the gap between military service and civilian reintegration that had claimed another casualty. Emma's specialized training made her invaluable during combat operations, but problematic during peacetime, when society preferred to honor her service abstractly rather than deal with practical realities of supporting veterans whose skills didn't translate to civilian employment. As Emma began packing her equipment with the same mechanical efficiency that had characterized her shooting, the observers understood that they had witnessed more than extraordinary marksmanship. They had seen someone maintain connection to skills that had once provided clear purpose and undeniable value, using accuracy as therapy for wounds that civilian society couldn't understand or adequately heal. The 75 consecutive bullseyes would become legend at Golden State Range, but the woman who had achieved them would disappear back into the anonymity of homelessness and forgotten service, carrying skills that had once saved lives but now served only as painful reminders of purpose that civilian life couldn't replace. Marcus, Thomas, and David stood in the silence left by Emma's departure, each processing the implications of what they had witnessed and their earlier assumptions about judging capability by appearance. The morning had transformed their understanding of marksmanship, from recreational competition to desperate therapy, from games to survival, from entertainment to the tragic cost of service that society celebrated but couldn't support. The empty shooting lane where Emma had performed her impossible demonstration served as a reminder that extraordinary capability often came disguised as ordinary desperation, and that the most remarkable stories belonged to people whose service had cost them everything except the skills that made them remarkable in the first place. The silence stretched across the range like a held breath as Emma shouldered her worn rifle case and turned toward the parking lot, leaving behind 75 perfect bullet holes that would reshape everything the observers thought they understood about heroism and sacrifice. Her footsteps echoed against the concrete with finality that suggested she had no intention of returning to face the uncomfortable recognition her performance had generated. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest as he watched her walk away, the weight of his earlier condescension crushing him with implications he was only beginning to understand. This woman had served her country in ways that civilian society preferred to celebrate abstractly rather than support practically, and he had dismissed her based on appearances that revealed nothing about the extraordinary capabilities hidden beneath her disheveled exterior. "Wait," he called out, his voice carrying across the range with urgency that surprised even himself. Emma paused, but didn't turn around, her posture suggesting reluctance to engage in further conversation that might lead to pity or uncomfortable questions about circumstances she couldn't change. Thomas stepped forward, his competitive instincts replaced by something approaching desperation as he realized that someone whose skills exceeded anything he had achieved through decades of training was about to disappear back into anonymity and neglect. "Please don't leave. We need to talk about what just happened here." Emma's shoulders sagged slightly, exhaustion visible in every line of her body as she turned to face the three men who had witnessed her demonstration of accuracy that belonged in legend rather than reality. "There's nothing to discuss. I came here to practice, I practiced, and now I'm leaving." That's all this was. David's law enforcement training urged him to prevent the loss of someone whose story needed to be told, whose service deserved recognition that went beyond abstract gratitude and meaningless ceremonies. That wasn't just practice. That was the most extraordinary marksmanship any of us have ever witnessed, accomplished by someone whose service clearly cost her everything. The woman's bitter laugh held enough pain to break hearts as she gestured toward her worn equipment and threadbare clothing. "My service cost me my sanity, my housing, my employability, and my place in civilian society. But it left me with skills that nobody wants and memories that nobody understands. So yes, it cost me everything except the ability to hit targets that don't matter anymore." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes as he processed the implications of her words. Here was someone who had sacrificed everything for her country's security, developing capabilities that had saved countless lives, only to be abandoned by the society she had protected when her usefulness expired. The injustice of it overwhelmed him with shame for his earlier assumptions and anger at systems that failed their most valuable defenders. "Your skills do matter," Thomas insisted, his voice thick with emotion as he struggled to find words adequate for addressing the tragedy of wasted potential and abandoned service. "What you demonstrated today proves that you're capable of things that most people can't even imagine. There has to be something we can do to help you find your place again." Emma's expression hardened with the bitter wisdom of someone who had learned through painful experience that good intentions rarely translated into meaningful change. "Help me how? By getting me a job where employers run background checks that reveal psychological evaluations mentioning PTSD and combat stress? By finding housing where landlords want stable employment history instead of military service that ended with medical discharge?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, each one highlighting systemic failures that abandoned veterans whose specialized skills didn't translate to civilian employment. Society celebrated their service with parades and ceremonies, while providing inadequate support for reintegration that required more than abstract gratitude. David realized that his law enforcement background provided limited insight into the challenges facing veterans whose military experience had been classified or specialized beyond civilian understanding. Emma's skills made her invaluable during combat operations but problematic in peacetime, when society preferred to honor her service abstractly rather than deal with practical realities of supporting someone whose training had no civilian equivalent. What if we could create opportunities that utilized your actual capabilities instead of ignoring them? Marcus asked, his instructor instinct searching for solutions that might bridge the gap between military expertise and civilian applications. Your marksmanship skills could be valuable in training environments or specialized security roles. Emma's response carried the weight of 3 years spent discovering that exceptional military capabilities often made veterans less employable rather than more valuable in civilian contexts. I've tried security work. Most companies want people who look reassuring to clients, not homeless women with PTSD who can kill someone from 2 kilometers away. My skills make people nervous instead of confident. Thomas felt his competitive perspective completely transformed as he understood that Emma's accuracy represented survival skills rather than recreational achievement, capabilities developed through experiences that civilian society couldn't comprehend or integrate effectively. His bronze medal seemed insignificant compared to marksmanship that had been tested under conditions where failure meant death. The crowd that had gathered to witness Emma's shooting began to disperse as the implications of what they had learned settled over them like uncomfortable truth. Many returned to their own practice sessions with new understanding of the difference between recreational accuracy and precision developed through life-or-death necessity, but few knew how to process the tragedy of abandoned service they had witnessed. Marcus stepped closer to Emma, his voice dropping to conversational levels as he struggled to find words adequate for addressing injustice that went beyond individual circumstances to systemic failures. I've been teaching marksmanship for 15 years, and I've never seen anything approaching what you demonstrated today. Your skills represent capabilities that shouldn't be wasted because of bureaucratic failures and social prejudices. My skills represent 3 tours in Afghanistan eliminating targets that threatened American interests, Emma replied, her voice carrying the flat tone of someone reciting facts to avoid emotional connection to memories that civilian life hadn't been able to erase. Those capabilities don't translate to civilian employment opportunities that don't involve law enforcement or private military contractors who prefer younger candidates without psychological baggage. David understood that Emma's specialized training had prepared her for situations that most people couldn't imagine and shouldn't have to understand, but civilian society struggled to integrate warriors whose experience went beyond conventional military service. Her capabilities made her invaluable during combat operations but difficult to employ in peacetime contexts that couldn't utilize or understand her expertise. There has to be something, Thomas insisted. His competitive drive transformed into determination to find solutions for someone whose achievements exceeded anything he had accomplished through recreational shooting. Training programs, consulting opportunities, something that recognizes what you're capable of instead of penalizing you for specialized experience. Emma's smile carried enough sadness to fill graveyards as she considered explanations that might help civilian shooters understand realities that went beyond their comfortable assumptions about military service and veteran reintegration. The problem isn't finding opportunities that utilize my skills. The problem is that my skills were developed for situations that civilian society doesn't want to acknowledge or understand. Her words emphasized the disconnect between abstract gratitude for military service and practical support for veterans whose specialized training had no civilian equivalent. Society celebrated their sacrifice while struggling to integrate capabilities that were simultaneously honored and feared by communities that preferred to keep warfare at comfortable distances. Marcus realized that his role as head instructor provided potential opportunities for someone whose expertise exceeded anything taught in civilian marksmanship programs. What if we could create a specialized training program that utilized your experience? Military contractors, law enforcement agencies, competitive shooters who want to understand precision beyond recreational levels. The suggestion carried hope mixed with practical challenges that Emma had encountered repeatedly during 3 years of discovering that good intentions rarely translated into sustainable employment for veterans whose specialized skills made them valuable, but difficult to integrate into civilian contexts that couldn't understand or utilize their expertise effectively. "I've considered teaching," Emma replied, her voice carrying undertones of experiences that had taught her to be cautious about opportunities that sounded better than they typically proved to be in practice. "But most civilian students want to learn recreational shooting, not combat applications that involve killing people under circumstances that can't be discussed openly." David's practical experience suggested that Emma's capabilities could be valuable in specialized training environments, but integrating military expertise into civilian programs required overcoming prejudices and bureaucratic obstacles that often made such opportunities more theoretical than practical. Thomas felt his understanding of competitive shooting completely redefined as he realized that everything he had learned through recreational training paled compared to expertise developed through experiences that had cost Emma everything except the ability to achieve accuracy that civilian society couldn't adequately value or support. As Emma prepared to leave again, Marcus made a decision that would change everything for someone whose service had cost her more than civilian society could understand or adequately compensate. "Don't go. Give us a chance to prove that your skills matter, that your service wasn't wasted, that there are people who understand what you're capable of and want to help you find your place again." The offer hung between them like a bridge across the gap between military service and civilian life, carrying possibilities that might transform Emma's expertise from painful reminder of abandoned purpose into foundation for rebuilding identity and worth that civilian society had failed to provide adequately. Emma's expression shifted as she considered whether to trust people whose understanding of her capabilities had been transformed by witnessing accuracy that exceeded their comprehension, whether to risk hope after 3 years of disappointment, whether to believe that her skills might still matter in ways that could provide sustainable future rather than painful therapy. The decision would determine whether extraordinary capabilities developed through service that cost everything would continue to be wasted through societal failures, or whether recognition and support might transform tragedy into triumph for someone whose sacrifice deserved better than abandonment and neglect. Emma's weathered hands trembled slightly as she set down her rifle case one final time, the weight of decision pressing against 3 years of learned caution about trusting civilian promises that rarely materialized into meaningful change. The morning sun had climbed higher during her demonstration, casting different shadows across the range that seemed to symbolize the transformation taking place in everyone present. 6 months, she said finally, her voice carrying careful hope tempered by experience that had taught her to protect herself from disappointment. "Give me 6 months to see if what you're offering is real, or just another well-intentioned promise that evaporates when the practical challenges become clear." Marcus felt relief flood through him as he realized that Emma was willing to trust them, with an opportunity to prove that her extraordinary capabilities could find meaningful application in civilian life. 6 months represented a reasonable timeline for establishing whether good intentions could translate into sustainable support that addressed her actual needs rather than abstract gratitude. "We'll start immediately," he replied, his instructor instincts already formulating plans for integrating Emma's expertise into training programs that could benefit from precision shooting knowledge that went far beyond recreational marksmanship. The range has connections with law enforcement agencies and private security companies that need specialized training consultants. Thomas stepped forward, his competitive background providing insight into opportunities that might utilize Emma's capabilities in contexts where accuracy was measured by professional standards rather than recreational achievement. The state police have been looking for advanced marksmanship instructors for their SWAT training programs. Your military experience and demonstrated accuracy would make you an ideal candidate. David's law enforcement contacts suggested additional possibilities for someone whose specialized skills could benefit organizations that required precision shooting capabilities but lacked access to trainers with Emma's level of expertise. Federal agencies sometimes need civilian contractors for specialized training programs. Your background would open doors that most instructors can't access. Emma listened to their suggestions with cautious interest, her experience warning her against optimism while her desperate need for purpose urged her to believe that her skills might finally find applications that provided both financial stability and meaningful work. The possibility of teaching again, of sharing knowledge that had been earned through experiences most people couldn't understand, offered hope for rebuilding identity around capabilities rather than limitations. "There are conditions," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to protect herself from exploitation disguised as opportunity. "I won't discuss classified operations or reveal tactical information that could compromise ongoing missions. My military service remains private except for general acknowledgement of specialized training." Marcus nodded his understanding, recognizing that Emma's expertise came with restrictions that civilian employers would need to respect if they wanted to benefit from her capabilities. Military contractors and law enforcement agencies understood operational security requirements that would make her knowledge valuable while protecting sensitive information. The crowd that had witnessed Emma's extraordinary demonstration began to understand that they were seeing more than recognition of exceptional marksmanship. They were witnessing potential redemption for someone whose service had cost her everything, whose skills had been dismissed by civilian society that couldn't understand or adequately value specialized military training. Thomas felt his competitive perspective permanently altered by meeting someone whose accuracy had been developed through necessity rather than recreation, whose precision had saved lives rather than won trophies. His bronze medal would always remind him of the difference between games and genuine consequence, between achievement and survival. "What about housing?" David asked, his practical experience suggesting that employment opportunities would be meaningless if Emma couldn't access stable living arrangements that allowed her to rebuild her life around work rather than constant struggle for basic necessities. Emma's expression hardened slightly as she considered the interconnected challenges that made veteran reintegration so difficult for people whose specialized skills came with psychological costs that civilian society struggled to understand or accommodate. Most landlords want employment verification and references that don't include military service ending in medical discharge for PTSD. Marcus realized that helping Emma required addressing systemic obstacles that went beyond employment opportunities to include housing discrimination and social prejudices that penalized veterans for service-related disabilities. The range has connections with veteran support organizations that specialize in housing assistance for former military personnel with security clearances. The mention of security clearances highlighted another aspect of Emma's value that civilian society often overlooked. Her military service had provided her with access levels that made her valuable for government contracting work. But those same clearances required lifestyle stability that homelessness had made impossible to maintain. "My clearance expired 8 months ago," Emma admitted, her voice carrying frustration with bureaucratic systems that created catch-22 situations where veterans needed stable employment to maintain security clearances but needed security clearances to access employment that provided stability. David's law enforcement background provided insight into clearance renewal processes that might be available for veterans whose specialized skills made them valuable for government contracting work. Clearance renewal is possible with employer sponsorship and stable housing. If we can address the housing situation, employment opportunities requiring clearances become accessible again. Thomas understood that Emma's situation represented systemic failures that affected many veterans whose specialized training should have made them valuable but instead made them difficult to integrate into civilian contexts that couldn't understand or utilize their expertise effectively. Her story highlighted the disconnect between abstract gratitude for military service and practical support for veteran reintegration. "There's something else," Emma said, her voice dropping to barely audible levels as she prepared to reveal the final barrier that had prevented her from finding sustainable civilian employment. "My discharge papers list the reason as psychological unfitness for duty. Most employers interpret that as dangerous instability rather than combat stress requiring treatment." The revelation emphasized how military bureaucracy had inadvertently sabotaged Emma's civilian prospects by categorizing service-related psychological injuries in ways that civilian employers misunderstood as character flaws rather than treatable conditions resulting from extraordinary service under impossible circumstances. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest as he realized that Emma had been penalized twice for her service, first by the psychological costs of combat operations, and second by administrative classifications that made civilian employment nearly impossible despite her extraordinary capabilities and clear dedication to duty. "We'll work around that," he said firmly, his instructor authority lending weight to promises that might finally provide Emma with opportunities that recognized her value rather than penalizing her for service-related challenges. Military contractors and government agencies understand combat stress documentation differently than civilian employers. David's practical experience suggested that Emma's discharge classification was common among veterans whose specialized roles had exposed them to psychological stressors that civilian society couldn't understand. But military contractors accepted as occupational hazards rather than disqualifying conditions. As the morning progressed toward afternoon, the three men found themselves committed to supporting someone whose demonstration had transformed their understanding of what marksmanship could represent. Emma's 75 consecutive bullseyes had become a catalyst for recognizing that extraordinary capability often came disguised as ordinary desperation. "When do we start?" Emma asked, her voice carrying tentative hope balanced by caution, earned through 3 years of disappointment with civilian systems that celebrated her service abstractly while providing inadequate practical support for reintegration challenges. Marcus pulled out his phone, already scrolling through contacts that might provide immediate opportunities for someone whose capabilities exceeded anything available through conventional training programs. "This afternoon, I'm calling the State Police Training Coordinator who's been looking for advanced marksmanship instructors with specialized experience." Thomas felt his competitive career redefined as he realized that helping Emma represented an opportunity to contribute to something more meaningful than recreational achievement. His technical knowledge combined with her military expertise could create training programs that bridged the gap between civilian marksmanship and professional applications. David's law enforcement contacts provided additional resources for someone whose specialized training could benefit organizations that needed precision shooting capabilities but lacked access to instructors with Emma's level of expertise and security clearance potential. 6 months later, Emma stood in the same shooting position where she had demonstrated impossible accuracy to skeptical observers who had become advocates for recognizing hidden worth disguised by circumstances beyond individual control. Her appearance had transformed along with her prospects, professional attire replacing threadbare clothing, confident posture replacing defensive wariness. The advanced marksmanship training program she had developed was attracting students from federal agencies and military contractors who needed specialized instruction that went beyond recreational shooting to address real-world applications requiring precision under pressure. Her expertise had found purpose that provided both financial stability and meaningful work. Marcus watched from the instruction booth as Emma guided a class of law enforcement officers through long-range shooting techniques that utilized principles developed through combat experience rather than competitive shooting. Her teaching methods were revolutionizing how civilian shooters understood the relationship between accuracy and consequence. Thomas had discovered that his competitive background provided valuable perspective for students who needed to understand both recreational marksmanship and professional applications. His collaboration with Emma was producing training materials that bridged theoretical knowledge and practical experience earned under circumstances that most civilian instructors couldn't comprehend. David's law enforcement contacts had facilitated Emma's security clearance renewal, opening doors to government contracting opportunities that utilized her specialized expertise for training programs that required both exceptional marksmanship skills and understanding of operational security requirements. The range had become something more than a recreational facility through Emma's presence, evolving into a training center that attracted serious students whose needs went beyond weekend hobby shooting to professional development that could save lives in real-world applications. Emma's story had spread through military and law enforcement communities as an example of what was possible when society recognized and supported veteran capabilities, rather than penalizing former service members for specialized training that civilian contexts couldn't initially understand or accommodate. Her 75 consecutive bullseyes had become legend, but more importantly, they had become catalyst for change that transformed one person's tragedy into triumph, while highlighting the potential value of veterans whose service had provided capabilities that civilian society needed to recognize and support, rather than waste through neglect and misunderstanding. The transformation proved that extraordinary capability often came disguised as ordinary desperation, that judging worth by appearance could blind observers to remarkable potential, and that providing genuine support for veteran reintegration could unlock value that benefited entire communities, rather than abandoning heroes whose service had cost them everything except the skills that made them invaluable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.